Okay, so this is a bit of a overview or debrief video for my Yokomo Works 93 and my Schumacher Cat 2000 that I ran at the 2018 Vintage Off-Road Nationals. I just got back earlier tonight from that race. And a cool thing about VONATS this year is that they added a four-wheel drive class. So in the past, four-wheel drive buggy had everything pre-1995 with an exception for the low C XX4. And this year, what they did is um, have a classic four-wheel drive class that was everything pre 1995, and then and you could only run a 13.5 motor in that. And then they had your standard four-wheel drive buggy class that was basically everything like 1996 or later, but you were allowed to run earlier cars as well if you wanted to. So what I decided to do to try this year was to run my Works 93 in the classic four-wheel drive class, and then the Cat 2000 in the four-wheel drive buggy class, which, this is a 1993 buggy, just like this car, but it drives way better. So I had no concerns about being fast with this buggy. So I managed to TQ and win both the classic and standard four-wheel drive buggy classes, which I'm happy about. But unfortunately, the turnout this year was pretty low for four-wheel drive for both classes. In the past, when the class was bigger, a lot of the entrants had come from abroad. They had traveled, and a lot of those people just couldn't make it this year. So four-wheel drive buggy was actually like 3 cars, and classic four-wheel drive was 4 cars, one of which was an Avanti that wasn't driving very well. So it was effectively a 3-car race as well. So, it would have been nice to see a larger field, but at the same time, I did have some good competition from the second place finisher in both races, so I can't really complain too much. I'll start with the 93 Works. For this car, I did make a few setup changes compared to how I had last run it at Walkett a few years ago. Again, because the grip level at RCE is higher than a Walkett, so I had to drop the ride height. I had to run stiffer springs, so I'm now running associated blue springs in the rear and low C blue springs up front. I dropped the ride height, I think, to about 20 millimeters. And that was about it. After the first qualifier, I noticed the car wasn't cornering very well, and the front diff felt very strange. I took the front diff apart, and it was completely bone dry. There was no grease in there whatsoever. And I think the grease had just kind of flung itself out from all the times I'd run this car. I never thought to check it. So I rebuilt the diff, threw it back in, and it made quite a bit of a difference in terms of how it cornered. And then later on, as the day wore on, the track became higher grip, and so we went from treaded tires like standard electrons to ghosted tires. I happened to have a pair of more or less ghosted electrons for the YZ10 because I had run these, multiple years prior at VONATS with my other YZ10s. So luckily I had a set of ghosted electrons for the YZ10. I did not for the Cat 2000. I only have treaded tires for that. So that was a separate challenge during the main. But during the main for this, this was technically not the fastest car on the track. The guy who had the faster car had a whole bunch of mechanical issues, and on top of that, he tended to drive too aggressively. So I kind of took advantage of that as during the qualifiers in the mains, especially during the main. When you have a driver like that who is too hard on the equipment, and who generally doesn't race very cleanly when they're trying to pass you. What you want to try to do is to build enough of a gap to them to force them to have to push really hard to catch you. So, even if they're faster, that's fine, but now they have to be even more faster just to catch you, and they're more likely to make a mistake or even break out of the race. So that's kind of what happened for him, which on the one hand, it sucked for him, but at the same time, if he were, a more consistent driver, he probably could have won the race. But this car, even though it wasn't the fastest car on the track, I did manage to wheel it around pretty quickly. I had to adjust my driving style a bit compared to how I would drive the Cat. The Cat actually drove a lot like my Kyosho Rampage Pro E. It drives a lot like a mid-motor two-wheel drive buggy. This is a little bit harder. It corners okay, not perfectly. It corners okay, but it's more the jumping and landing performance that this car really suffers with. And I think the reason for that is because the leading edge of the bumper here is in front of the front tires. So anytime you approach a jump face, or if you are landing off of a jump that doesn't have an actual lander, if it's just a flat landing, the bumper will hit the ground the first. And so that makes kind of a hard landing. With the Cat 2000, the bumper is smaller and it's pushed further back, so the leading edge is actually behind the front wheels. So you have much better jumping and landing performance with the Cat 2000 than you do with the 93 Works. So, maybe I can improve upon this a bit by making a modified bumper where this leading edge is pushed back a bit. As you can see, there's a bit of a gap here between the inner hinge pin for the suspension arms and the leading edge of the bumper. Maybe I can fabricate a bumper that just pushes this edge back, and that would improve the landing performance. And then for the cornering performance, there's not much I can do. Like, I was kind of suffering, I think, with mid-corner cornering, and I could sort of fix that maybe with more Ackerman, but there's no Ackerman adjustment for this. The center plate here that's used on the 93 Works, even it's kind of strange. There is a hole out here that you would think could be for Ackerman, but it's when you look at how the hole is positioned at full steering lock, it's actually kind of in line with this inner hole that you use by default. So I don't think it would really buy you much in terms of Ackerman. I do know actually that for the YR4, they made steering knuckles that were that are exactly the same as for the 93 Works, but there were two mounting holes here for the outer portion of the steering link. So maybe I could try that to see if that would give me, try the other mounting hole to see if that would give me more Ackerman. That might be able to help me a bit. But it's a good car, but certainly not the fastest car I could run for that class. And then as for the Cat 2000, this car is almost perfect, at least as a driving car. It's a lot harder to work on if you break something than the YZ10. The YZ10 is very easy to work on, relatively speaking. This one's a bit harder, so I only brought a few caster blocks with me. I'd have brought a whole bunch of other parts, but I didn't bring that many caster blocks for some reason, and that's what I happened to break when I was practicing with the car. So I only had one block left, and I think it was at a different caster angle, so I really didn't have any blocks left. So I had to just drive conservatively with this car throughout the race day, just to survive through the day. But even still, I set the endpoint. I turned the endpoint down on the motor just to be able to clear, the jumps in the infield without overshooting anything, and that allowed me to drive the car more smoothly without overdriving the car, and that seemed to work very well. I very easily TQ'd in the first round, and then as the grip came up, I was racing the same person in this class as in the other four-wheel drive class, and he had a different car than mine, but it was also very quick. And later on in the day, he was actually threatening my TQ run, which was good. It meant that I had an actual race going on. So I really had to push to try to, get that back. And it turns out we both broke out of that race, and I retained my TQ from the first round. But I knew he was going to be very fast in the mains, and I don't recall what tires he was running, but he might have had some kind of a ghosted tire, or maybe, a slick of some sort to give him more grip. If I had that for this car for the mains, I would have been a lot faster in the mains. So I'm going to post videos from the mains for all of these events soon, and you'll see that what happened with this car in the four-wheel drive main is I had actually built up a substantial lead in the beginning, not because I was fast, but because there were accidents behind me, and that gave me sort of time to drive a bit more slowly and conservatively, and try to just get in the groove with this car after having run, the other cars earlier in earlier mains. And I didn't want to crash. I didn't want to break out or anything. So I was just kind of taking it easy. And then, sure enough, that other guy was building, he was catching up to me. So at some point, it became a challenge of just managing the gap between myself and him. I knew he had to push harder to catch me, and that increased the risk of him making an error, which he did end up making a few times. And then that grew my gap a bit, and then he started to pull in on that. And, it was kind of this back and forth game. He never got around me. And toward the end of the race, as he was getting really close, that's when I got more comfortable with the car, and I really started pushing it a little bit harder each lap, uh, so that I could confidently put down faster lap times to stay ahead and try to, minimize any compression of the gap between him and myself throughout the race. So I think I drove smartly considering the tires I had for that track condition at that part of the day. So I'm pretty happy with that. I think going forward, one of the things I'd want to do with this car is get, a set of slicks, or, maybe take a pair of electrons that I have mounted and just run them out so I can have ghosted electrons. And the other thing I might do is run stiffer springs up front. I was already running, I'd actually started with the gray springs, and I noticed it was rolling a bit much. And I figured, okay, maybe I would increase the roll center, but the roll center is already as high as I can make it. So then the next thing would be to run stiffer springs or drop the ride height. I knew I had to drop the ride height, so I started with that. That seemed to work pretty well. So I just stayed with that throughout the weekend. Going forward, I might increase the stiffness from these gray springs to maybe the blue springs. I'd run those up front for that particular track. That might be better, because the car was still rolling a bit much. I had a bit of push in the corners in some cases, so maybe that would help a bit. Otherwise, man, this car is really nice. I basically tore it down and rebuilt it since the last time I made any running videos of this car, so it'd be nice and fresh going into the VONATS this year, and it really paid off. And this car is just great. I'd love to run it again in the four-wheel drive buggy class the next time I go to VONATS. I do have other YZ10s that I haven't raced yet that I would like to race as well, so I have to try to figure out, how I want to manage running those versus running this. So we'll see what happens, but this is, I think I've made some videos on this before already. It's a really, really great car, so quite happy with it. Yeah, so I think that's it for this video, and thanks for watching.